Buenos días a todos. Como presidente del Comité Español del Consejo Mundial de la Energía, es un placer para mí daros la bienvenida a esta nueva jornada de nuestra tradicional sesión titulada en esta ocasión Energy and Climate Future, whither European Green Deal Diplomacy. Como saben, es un efecto mixto y está siendo retransmitido por streaming desde el auditorio de Torre Cepsa. Está previsto tenga una duración de 2 horas y está dividido el programa en varias sesiones. Una sesión inaugural, una sesión plenaria, una mesa redonda y una sesión plenaria. Y contamos con panelistas de primer nivel. La primera sesión será en español y el resto en inglés. En todo momento cuentan con traducción simultánea. Además, disponen de la herramienta Slido que aparece en pantalla para hacer preguntas en la mesa redonda. No les entretengo más y a continuación me gustaría dar la palabra a Philippe Boisseau, consejero delegado de Cepsa. Por favor, Philippe.
Gracias Íñigo. Presidenta del Club Español de la Energía, presidente del Real Instituto Elcano, huéspedes, invitados, prestigiosos, estimados amigos. Buenos días a todos y a todas y bienvenidos a esta nueva edición del evento anual del Comité Español del Consejo Mundial de la Energía. Es un verdadero placer volver a acogeros aquí en nuestra casa y una buena señal de que las cosas empiezan a volver a la normalidad. Muchas gracias a los que habéis podido venir y a los que no veis a través de las pantallas. Y muchas gracias especialmente a todos los ponentes y a los organizadores. La sostenibilidad y la lucha contra el cambio climático son una cuestión global. La Unión Europea ha sido líder mundial en la transición energética durante décadas y se ha mantenido fiel a sus ambiciones, incluso en plena crisis del COVID-19, aumentando su objetivo de reducción de emisiones para 2030 al menos en un 55%, y comprometiéndose a lograr la neutralidad de carbono para 2050. La Unión Europea está, por tanto, liderando el camino hacia la transformación de la economía y la sociedad en todo el mundo. Esperamos que la Conferencia de las Naciones Unidas sobre el Cambio Climático, que comenzará en unas semanas en Glasgow, la COP26, sea un hito crucial para elevar las ambiciones globales y que cada vez más países se sumen a la senda de sostenibilidad que la UE ha marcado y que nosotros, como compañía, compartimos plenamente. En este proceso de transformación, nuestra industria juega un papel clave en el futuro de Europa, como acelerador y motor del cumplimiento de los objetivos climáticos y de recuperación económica. Ambos objetivos no son incompatibles. Sin recuperación económica no podemos hacer frente a la ambición climática. Y sin avances en el proceso de transición ecológica, cualquier esfuerzo de recuperación será insostenible. Necesitamos, por tanto, contar con nuestra industria, protegerla y acompañarla en su transformación. En efecto, las empresas necesitamos contar con un marco regulatorio que acelere esta transformación y que a la vez nos proteja e impulse nuestra competitividad internacional. Las empresas europeas queremos competir, pero para que la competencia sea justa tenemos que poder hacerlo en igualdad de condiciones con aquellos competidores internacionales que no están sometidos a las mismas exigencias sociales y medioambientales. Solo de este modo podremos lograr generar oportunidades de negocio que sean sostenibles e inclusivas. Si no apostamos por proteger e impulsar esta competitividad empresarial, nos arriesgamos a que parte del tejido industrial y de las emisiones que generan se trasladen a otras partes del mundo. Destinos, por cierto, hoy por hoy, son menos estrictos en sus objetivos y sistemas de control. De este modo, nos arriesgamos, en primer lugar, no solo a no cumplir con nuestras ambiciones climáticas, sino a malograr los esfuerzos realizados hasta la fecha en materia climática, al provocar que las emisiones, en vez de reducirse, aumenten sin control en otras partes del mundo. Pero este riesgo tiene también una dimensión social, porque toda deslocalización implica también la pérdida de talento, inversión e innovación europea y destrucción de empleo estable y de calidad vinculado al territorio. La transformación hacia el horizonte de neutralidad climática no será inmediata y conllevará un tiempo de adaptación. En este proceso de cambio, debemos asegurarnos de que todos los ciudadanos sean capaces de participar en condiciones de equidad de esta transición, y ahí es donde la competitividad de las industrias juega un papel fundamental, garantizando el acceso a largo plazo a energías limpias a precios competitivos y ofreciendo durante el proceso de alternativas menos contaminantes que, aun cuando sean de carácter transitorio, se encuentran al alcance inmediato de todos los ciudadanos. Asegurar, en definitiva, una transición justa e inclusiva para toda la población de forma homogénea en todo el territorio, especialmente para aquellos grupos más vulnerables. Porque si la transición ecológica no es justa, difícilmente se podrá pretender que sea sostenible en el tiempo. Hoy tenemos la suerte de contar con panelistas de primer nivel para hablar del futuro energético y climático, así como del papel de la Unión Europea. Many thanks, Joseph McMoneagle and Lord Dibben, for having accepted our invitation. It is a real honor having you in this event. Gracias también a Ana Palacio, que vino presencialmente también, que guiará la mesa de Javier López, András Rosmer, María Pasturkovka y Claudio Sebach. Terminaremos con un breve video preparado por los representantes de la empresa, miembros del Comité Español del WEC, que pondrá punto final a este programa que promete ser de máximo interés. Muchas gracias a todas y a todos. Espero que disfruten de la jornada. Me gustaría ahora hacer la palabra a José Juan Juris, presidente del Real Instituto Elcano. Muchísimas gracias.
Buenos días. Es un honor estar aquí invitado en este importante evento. El Real Instituto Elcano ha dedicado mucho tiempo, mucho esfuerzo y lo va a seguir dedicando a la diplomacia de las negociaciones de cambio climático, porque creemos que es central. De hecho, las políticas de cambio climático son el desafío más importante que tiene nuestra civilización. No solo se trata de invertir, de innovar, de adoptar nuevas tecnologías, de introducir esas dimensiones sociales y de crecimiento a las que acaba de referirse Philippe, sino que necesitamos que todos esos cambios se produzcan coordinadamente y de forma global. Y esto lo que nos pone es un listón muy alto para saber qué es tener éxito. Tener éxito en ese reto tan multidisciplinar, pasa por tener un proceso de negociaciones climáticas que tenga una gobernanza global, eficiente, transparente y justa. Sin una gobernanza global no vamos a poder preservar nuestros valores como civilización, nuestras tasas de bienestar, nuestro crecimiento, nuestra confianza en nosotros mismos y en el optimismo en el futuro. Necesitamos esa gobernanza global eficiente, esa diplomacia verde, que es realmente lo único que nos va a permitir avanzar hacia ese objetivo que estamos buscando. La cumbre de Glasgow, COP26, es una gran oportunidad. De hecho, probablemente es una de las últimas oportunidades que tenemos para construir esa diplomacia pública climática que sea eficiente y que sitúe en el centro de los debates los grandes temas a los que les tenemos que dar respuesta. Necesitamos que en esa cumbre la diplomacia funcione y asegure que los países miembros del acuerdo van a presentar sus nuevos planes nacionales y estrategias de descarbonización, que vayan a aumentar la ambición, porque todos sabemos que con los actuales niveles de ambición no es suficiente para evitar ese escenario dramático que la ciencia nos indica con toda seguridad. Necesitamos que se cierre el libro de reglas del Acuerdo de París y necesitamos el reequilibrio entre la financiación para la mitigación y la adaptación. Son muchos temas los que tenemos delante de nosotros, un requerimiento a esa diplomacia verde a la que hacía antes referencia, porque sin cerrar estas grandes cuestiones, sin hacer reales, poner donde estamos poniendo las palabras, los compromisos y el dinero, será muy difícil avanzar. A menos de una semana de la cumbre, lamentablemente hay que decir que las expectativas no son excesivamente halagüeñas. Elementos como el COVID, el lockdown, ha impedido que esa diplomacia que vive tanto del contacto físico y de las relaciones físicas haya podido generar o prever acuerdos que sean fáciles. Nada va a ser fácil en la cumbre y por eso es por lo que este tipo de actos son tan importantes. Son llamadas de atención, son indicaciones, son análisis independientes sobre qué necesitamos realmente para movernos hacia el futuro y el Real Instituto Elcano está realmente muy honrado y muy satisfecho de poder contribuir a ese debate global con todos ustedes, con el World Energy Council, el Club Español de la Energía y sobre todo con nuestro patrono, Cepsa, con Philippe, patrono nuestro en el Real Instituto Elcano. Como él, espero que los debates que van a tener esta mañana sean de gran utilidad y nos ayuden a consolidar esa diplomacia pública que tanto necesitamos. Muchas gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias, José Juan. Y ahora la presidenta del Club Español de la Energía no puede estar con nosotros, pero nos ha mandado un vídeo, Mavi Zingoni.
Buenos días a todos. Consejero delegado de Cepsa, Philippe Boisseau, presidente del Real Instituto Elcano, José Juan Ruiz, queridos amigos. Para mí es un placer estar una vez más aquí por segundo año consecutivo en esta nueva jornada del Comité Español del Consejo Mundial de la Energía. Lamentablemente hoy, por cuestiones de agenda, no puedo acompañar a Philippe, a José Juan y también a Íñigo, pero la verdad es que no quiero dejar de daros las gracias y de daros la enhorabuena, no solo a vosotros que habéis hecho posible esto, sino también a todas aquellas personas que han contribuido a la puesta en marcha de esta jornada. Creo que el programa de hoy es altamente interesante, no solo por la temática, sino también por el elevadísimo nivel de todos sus ponentes y participantes. Hace un año atrás hablábamos en esta misma jornada, en un contexto de enorme incertidumbre, sobre cómo el cambio climático se estaba posicionando en el centro de las políticas de recuperación y desarrollo industrial, especialmente en Europa, y esto apoyado en el Pacto Verde y en los fondos Next Generation. Desde entonces, podemos decir que esta tendencia solo ha seguido tomando fuerza. Ha seguido tomando fuerza aquí en nuestro continente y dejadme decir, también afortunadamente, en otras regiones y economías mundiales, como es el caso de China y de Estados Unidos. La Unión Europea, con la publicación del paquete de medidas Fit for 55, que se ha hecho en julio de este año, ha concretado su estrategia para facilitar el cumplimiento de los objetivos del Green Deal, esos objetivos que buscan alcanzar la neutralidad en emisiones para el año 2050. Las medidas que están contenidas en este paquete, creo que lo sabemos y a nadie escapa, que son en la actualidad objeto de muchísimo debate y también que van a suponer cambios muy importantes y repercusiones también tanto en el ámbito económico, técnico, medioambiental, como especialmente social para el conjunto de la Unión Europea, todos sus Estados miembros y también todos sus sectores económicos. Pero además, creo que muchas de estas medidas van a conllevar también consecuencias geopolíticas. En particular, me quiero centrar en las modificaciones en el mercado de derecho de emisiones y la introducción de este mecanismo de ajuste de carbono en frontera, que sabemos que van a repercutir en la política exterior y en las relaciones con nuestros socios comerciales. De esta forma se están generando nuevos retos, nuevos desafíos para la diplomacia energética de la Unión Europea. Una diplomacia que, como se ha comentado, está haciéndose hueco en la agenda política de la Comisión Europea. Y que debe hacer también una llamada urgente a una acción colectiva mundial para poder alcanzar esta neutralidad climática y los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, donde la energía tiene un papel esencial. Una diplomacia que además tiene que poder lidiar con una realidad geopolítica cada vez más compleja, donde confluyen elementos convencionales del petróleo y del gas y nuevos paradigmas también ligados a la transición energética, con nuevos jugadores, nuevos players, nuevos riesgos y también nuevas rivalidades. Y todo ello en un contexto de gran incertidumbre, como decía al principio, y de una enorme inestabilidad en los mercados energéticos como el que estamos viviendo y a nadie escapa. Un contexto en el que será necesario realizar una gestión adecuada, seguir intentando gestionarlo y con soluciones pensadas para todos los ciudadanos. Y cuando hablamos también de los ciudadanos, hablamos también del empleo, hablamos de la industria y el poder mantener la competitividad de la industria europea. Por eso, el contar también con los ciudadanos, contar con el apoyo de la sociedad en su conjunto, pasa a ser un requisito imprescindible. Como también es crucial el garantizar la resiliencia, la competitividad y la seguridad de suministro de la Unión Europea y de sus Estados miembros, abordando también las nuevas vulnerabilidades que puedan suponer esta transición en materia, por ejemplo, de nuevas tecnologías y también en materia de materiales o minerales que podemos considerar estratégicos. En este aspecto, asegurar esa neutralidad tecnológica es un factor clave para afrontar con éxito las exigencias que tiene una transición que hoy ya estamos viviendo. Por ese motivo, creo que es una muy buena noticia que la diplomacia del Pacto Verde esté ganando peso en la agenda política de la Comisión. Con el Green Deal, por supuesto que van a surgir nuevas opciones de diálogo y cooperación internacional y van a surgir en múltiples áreas como la innovación, la financiación, el comercio de emisiones o también en la formulación de normativas y estándares comunes. Esos estándares comunes en los que la Unión Europea tiene que estar presente como un actor relevante. Debates como el que veremos hoy, como el que veremos a continuación, donde se analicen estas nuevas realidades, sus implicaciones y cuáles deben ser las prioridades de la Unión Europea en esta materia, son muy oportunos y también muy necesarios para acercar este tema tan importante a toda la sociedad. Este tipo de debates, además, ayudan a conocer las oportunidades que se derivan para nuestra industria energética, una industria que, como bien sabemos y estamos demostrando, está profundamente comprometida con la sostenibilidad ambiental y también con la sostenibilidad socioeconómica. Por mi parte, nada más. Quiero terminar uniéndome a los agradecimientos al Comité Español del Consejo Mundial de la Energía y a todos sus miembros, al Real Instituto Elcano, nuestro aliado estratégico en este evento durante ya tantos años, a Cepsa por su patrocinio y a todos los ponentes y también, por supuesto, a los asistentes que hoy estáis haciendo que este debate valga la pena. Also, I'd like to have a special thanks to our distinguished guest, Joseph McNaughey, Secretary General of the International Energy Forum, and Lord Devine, Chairman of the United Kingdom Climate Change Committee. Muchísimas gracias a todos y que el debate sea muy provechoso.
Bueno, comenzamos seguidamente con la primera sesión plenaria sobre Key Issues of the Global Energy Agenda, para que tenemos el honor de contar con el secretario general del International Energy Forum, Joseph McMonigle. Mr. McMonigle se encuentra aquí en persona en el auditorio con nosotros. Good morning, Mr. McMonigle. It has been a very nice surprise finding last week that you could be here with us in person. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and doing the effort of coming from Riyadh. It's a real privilege to have you here to give us a general overview of the key issues of the global energy agenda. Your view is going to be particularly interesting in this time of turbulent markets. For those who don't know, the International Energy Forum, let me explain, was founded 30 years ago, is today the world's largest organization of energy ministers from 72 countries and includes both producing and consuming nations. IEF has a broad mandate to examine all energy issues, including oil and gas, clean and renewable, energy sustainability, energy transitions, and new technologies. It has also an important role providing data transparency and a strong focus on the critical issues of energy poverty. Joseph McMonigle officially assumed his position July 1st, 2020 as the 5th Secretary General. He has over 20 years of experience working on energy issues on the public and private sectors. I'm not going to mention all the details of his CV, just mention a few things. Mr. McMonigle was Chief of Staff of the U.S. Department of Energy during the first term of the Bush administration, 2001-2005. He also served 2 years as former Vice Chairman and U.S. representative of the International Energy Agency. And in addition, he was the U.S. co-chair of the U.S.-China Energy Working Group as part of the DOA portfolio. Once again, it's a pleasure having you with us. Secretary General McMonigle, please, when you can.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to join in person, even though we have a hybrid event. It's great to have many of us meeting in person. Really, it's one of the first in-person speeches I've given since taking the job, so it's a real pleasure to do this. And I want to thank the Spanish Committee of the World Energy Council and the Energy Club of Spain, as well as the Elcano Institute and Cepsa. I'm pleased to have so many friends also with us today. I'm especially honored that Minister Ana Palacio is here, someone that I've worked with back in my time in government, and really a pleasure, and look forward to your session as well. And also to my friend and collaborator and advisor to the IEF, Yvonne Martens, thank you for being here and all your help over the years. The chairman gave you a little bit of background on the IEF, but just to put it in a capsule before I start the speech, just to give you a little perspective of where we come from. The IEF was founded about 30 years ago, so this year is actually our 30th anniversary. It was founded really as a way for producers and consumers, mainly OPEC and IEA, to begin discussing issues and collaborating, because prior to that time, really both groups were in their separate camps and really did not talk that much. So we are the producer-consumer of the groups. Both IEA and OPEC are non-voting members of my executive board. But increasingly, especially as we talk about these issues today, our group is also, in addition to being producer-consumer organization, we're also the organization of developed and developing countries. And I think this is a critical role for us in the upcoming debates. So I appreciate the opportunity to provide some remarks on the global energy agenda and give you a perspective on achieving increasingly urgent energy, climate, and Sustainable Development Goals from the International Energy Forum, the IEF. As we meet this week, the interconnectivity of these goals are on full display. Gas markets in Europe and now Asia are on red alert. Natural gas is now the most expensive fossil fuel on an energy equivalent basis, comparable to an oil price of about $200 per barrel. It's critical that we don't let a climate crisis turn into an energy crisis. We need to keep making progress on climate action, certainly, while at the same time ensure that we have energy supplies today to power the global economy. And I'm particularly concerned about high energy prices and volatility and what that might do to undermine public support for climate action. Because once we lose public support, it's very difficult to build back. As a result, the IEF is announcing today that we will hold a special natural gas market dialogue meeting with both producer and consumer ministers on October 28th, along with industry experts, many CEOs of energy companies, both gas companies and power companies. So let me just go into a little bit of how we see the current state of the global energy sector, and especially with regards to the pandemic. Certainly the rebound in fossil fuel demand after the pandemic was really anticipated. As the world awakens after COVID, economic growth has returned. The OECD September report showed that global GDP is already above 2019 levels. The OECD global growth forecast for 2021 is 5.7%. In 2022, it's forecast to be 4.5%, and that's compared to a decline of 3.4% in 2020. In addition, something that we're all familiar with, the ongoing tightness in supply chains is also causing tension in the global energy market. And it also must be noted that government stimulus plans and programs support demand in infrastructure and construction and also generate more demand. The transportation sector was probably the hardest hit. Aviation is still about 25% below pre-COVID levels. It was offset, however, by increased demand in other sectors, for example, petrochemicals, industrial and power generation. And of course, we've had fuel switching mainly in Asia. As far as oil is concerned, really all previous oil demand shocks have shown strong and immediate rebounds, and this is certainly the case this time. So will 2021 be a record in fossil fuel demand? Well, it will be close. On a quarterly basis, the fourth quarter of 2021 will certainly be higher than 2019. Also, we had a warmer winter last year. In particular, Europe had a mild winter in 2019-2020. It was the warmest on record. And Asia had a mild start to the winter last year. So if this is just a normal or even colder than normal winter, energy demand will certainly be higher in the fourth quarter versus 2019. And unfortunately, this is very ominous for gas markets and the power sector. Last week, the IEA came out with their World Energy Outlook report, and it had two main takeaways, at least from our view. Number one, the world is not investing enough in clean energy to meet our climate goals. And number two, the world is not investing enough in oil and gas to keep up with our demand for fossil fuels. And the IEF agrees on both of these points. We must continue with the deployment of more renewables to meet our climate goals. But on the second point, I'd like to sort of talk a little bit more and give you a perspective from the IEF viewpoint regarding investment in oil and gas supplies. Last year, the IEF rang the alarm bell with a report that we issued along with Boston Consulting Group, Yvonne's former place of business. And we called it a peak investment crisis in oil and gas development. And essentially what we did was outlined CapEx cuts by companies of 35% in 2020. We're currently working on updating the report for a December release, and we're seeing another decline in CapEx investment this year of about 25%. We said at the time, 2 years in a row of significant CapEx cuts will result in volatility and higher prices, and it has arrived even sooner than anticipated. The report stated that industry investment will have to rise over the next 3 years by 25% yearly from 2020 levels just to stave off a crisis. So I also agree with others that say that there are many factors for the current gas crisis in Europe and that we can't blame it solely on the energy transition. Certainly COVID is a big reason, as I've explained, but as I've explained, there are structural and fundamental issues about energy markets and systems impacted by investment that are really at the heart of the problem. I'm very concerned about the upcoming winter months, but it's important to note that when winter is ended in April or May, whenever it will be, these structural issues will remain. Now, market uncertainty about COVID and the transition pathways present major challenges for policymakers and companies with regard to these investment decisions. The IEF every year in February hosts the annual Energy Outlook Symposium, and this is when we have OPEC and IEA come, along with many private sector companies, present their outlooks for energy for the upcoming year. And just to take a snapshot of these outlook scenarios, over the next 20 years, the difference between the high and low demand cases is about 55 million barrels a day, whereas 10 years ago, it was only about 30 million barrels a day. Just to put this in context, 55 million barrels a day is more than half of today's oil market. If you're an energy company, how do you run your strategy and plan your investments? And it's particularly hard for policymakers as well, as we're seeing played out. The world has clear goals, but it lacks clear policies and certainty. Finally, the other area of great need of investment, in our view, is clean energy R&D. The IEA technology report, which came out last year, is probably one of the best IEA products that has come out in a while. And that report said that half of the emissions reduction needed to meet climate goals must come from innovation and new technologies. As a US citizen and the first Secretary General who was an American, I was pleased to see and have commended the Biden administration for proposing a 4-fold increase in clean energy R&D to get to $30 billion by 2030. In addition, President Macron last week introduced a new modern industrial strategy for France to invest in green hydrogen and small modular nuclear reactors with an investment of $30 billion by 2030. I know Spain has made big announcements about green hydrogen, as has Saudi Arabia and the UAE, both of which hope to become major exporters of this clean energy. While the private sector is doing its part on R&D, we really need governments to step up and take primary responsibility for clean energy R&D. It's critical to meeting our climate goals. The IEF is encouraging all governments to take the lead in this regard, and we are currently working on a tracker of clean energy R&D by governments to monitor progress. So let me end by thanking the World Energy Council of Spain and the Spanish Energy Club for having me here. It's so good to be here in person and meeting colleagues involved in discussion about energy policy and markets. Now more than ever, we need dialogue about energy security, market stability, and the transition. And with that, I'll be happy to take your questions.
Monica. Just two very quick questions. The first is about what about innovation and new technologies? With your feeling about your knowledge around the world, which do you think would be the most relevant technologies to be focused now? And a small comment about nuclear, please.
Okay. Certainly. Well, obviously, one of them I mentioned in my remarks, and that's hydrogen, and green hydrogen in particular. And here I think really we have to commend the EU and countries in Europe for taking the leadership in promoting hydrogen in terms of investment and policies and a roadmap. And indeed, it's given hydrogen, I think, great momentum around the world. And so I think really that is a credit to the EU, because I don't think it would have happened but for the emphasis that the EU and Europe is placing on hydrogen. The other one I would say is CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Even for hydrogen, which we just talked about, you need economy-wide uptake of CCUS and an implementation of CCUS. And really it's an area, even though I know it's controversial to some in some sectors, it's an area where both climate and energy ministers both agree. And I think it's critical to meeting our climate goals. It's critical for energy security. It's critical for affordability, which is one of the main issues today. So I think both of those sectors, I think, are those are really the favorite technologies, but you know, there could be others. And one of them you mentioned in the question is nuclear. And I do think nuclear, we're starting to see a little bit of a resurgence now back again as countries now look at their climate goals and realize they need new technologies in order to meet these goals that the countries are setting. And certainly, I mentioned the industrial policy that President Macron announced. Nuclear is one of the key components to it. Small modular nuclear reactors, not the big, major nuclear complexes that we have today. But and France, of course, has a great record and nuclear sector, and I think it's very significant that they're placing nuclear as a key component. I'd also note that the UK this week, I think, is announcing their strategy ahead of the COP meeting. Maybe we'll hear more of it today in one of the future panels, but at least according to press reports, nuclear looks to be a very big component of that UK strategy. So I think in both respects, that's very favorable. I think also you probably will be hearing more from other European countries and the US on nuclear as well.
Just to finalize very briefly, you mentioned that we are a bit behind in investment in renewables. We haven't made enough investment to maintain the level of fossil fuels. This means that this price is packed. What impact do you think it will have in the meeting of the COVID-26 now in Glasgow, and what do you think that would be the best outcome for the meeting? Just very briefly, please.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, there's no escaping that higher prices and volatility will be a backdrop for this COP meeting. I don't think it was originally back in the summer when organizers were planning the event that this would be the situation we would find ourselves in. But I think it's important because one of the other things I talked about in my remarks was volatility and higher prices undermining public support for climate action. And once you lose that, it's very hard to get back. And so what I'm hoping is that even though it'll be a big challenge and maybe even a distraction of sorts, I'm hoping that policymakers and delegates attending the COP meeting will engage more in a dialogue on the transition and maybe move away from what is viewed by many as a monologue right now. And so I think it's good that we're reminded that the markets are sending us a signal, and the delegates to COP, I think, have to be careful about that, because at the end of the day, we need to solve the climate crisis and we need public support to do it. In terms of what I think might be a successful outcome of COP, I would say two things. One is on the topic of methane. The US and the EU have announced this global methane challenge program to get countries to sign up for reductions by 2030. Methane, of course, is a primary cause of global warming, second only to CO2. And it traps 82 times the amount of emissions that CO2 does. So any kind of action on methane can have really tangible and important progress for climate change if we mitigate those emissions. And we know how to do it. It's cost effective. And I would just say that the IEF, from our standpoint, back in June of this year, we launched our own methane initiative, which basically tried to develop, along with a committee of member countries, a methodology for methane mitigation. And essentially, we teamed up with a French company, Kairos, who's a geospatial data firm, using EU satellite data, but also AI and big data, and also some, of course, expert analysis, and came up with timelines and defined methodologies in a transparent way. And so our initiative kind of complements what the EU and the US are doing on the global methane challenge. Now we have a methodology which we really didn't have. It's a very, methane emissions reduction is quite complicated, but we think we've played a role in sort of improving the way to go about that. And so now we have the methodology, we need to use it, we need to make it real. And so I see methane as being a key outcome potentially, and a big success point. Of course, the IPCC report this summer highlighted methane reduction as a key and important matter for the world to address. And the other one, I would just say, keep an eye on this. We mentioned it in the first question regarding nuclear. With France announcing nuclear being a new component, the UK, I think, announcing this week or shortly that nuclear will be a big component of their transition agenda. I'm a little privy to other activities that will be planned at COP. I know at least one or two other countries that will be making major announcements regarding nuclear. So I think you could see nuclear really emerge as a key solution, because I think it's now that we're looking at the problem, we have to get real about the solutions. And nuclear is certainly a real solution, one that we have now. Certainly there are technology improvements that can be made, but I think you could see nuclear as another key successful outcome of COP, and I think that would be a terrific thing.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. McManigal. It has been a pleasure having you for such an interesting speech, so thank you.
Yes.
Bueno, vamos a dar paso a la mesa redonda. Esta mesa redonda la va a moderar Ana Palacio, y como es tan obsesiva con el tiempo y hace muy bien, pues voy a ahorrarme un poco la introducción que tenía de ella. Todo el mundo conoce a Ana Palacio, nuestra primera ministra de Asuntos Exteriores, y ha tenido una trayectoria vinculada a la política exterior, la seguridad y relaciones internacionales. Así es que, por favor, Ana, tienes toda tu hora, ya veremos cómo nos arreglamos, por favor.
Pues muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a Cepsa, muchas gracias al Real Instituto Elcano, muchas gracias al Club Español de Energía por haberme invitado y darme esta oportunidad. Y además yo tengo un pasado muy fuerte en la energía, yo tengo un pasado nuclear. Ahí está, en Areva. I'm going to switch into English. And I would say, as an introduction, it's great, by the way, to see you just in this key position. I think, knowing you for so many years, this is going to be fantastic, just with the opening after the COVID. So what I would say in a very brief introduction is this gas crisis, this spiking of gas prices has revealed to the public how fragile our energy mix is. In this common endeavor to fight just green gas emissions. Green gas emissions you have highlighted, and many times we forget about methane. Methane is fundamental, and then just CO2. And this is our target. Let's not just get far from this target. Whatever helps to mitigate greenhouse emissions is good. And there are no preferences. We need everything. It's not either or, it's everything. So in this context, it's great to listen to what's going on in this crossroads of diplomacy and the European Union. Why? I would highlight 3 topics that came in different interventions. José Juan Ruiz, Magmoni, and just Boisseau. First thing, yes, the European Union is undoubtedly a standard bearer of the present global effort to transition into this non-greenhouse gases economy. Furthermore, the EU's ambition is to piece together a legal framework and a legal and action framework that will be a reference to the world. This is what we are. And it was mentioned, this just border compensating tax for CO2 tax. This is one of our signature initiatives. The title of this mission and the title of this session as well, the conference, reminds us that this diplomatic effort involves, besides the internal regulation of the European Union, the external projection of our internal policies, be it industrial, be it, of course, energy union and others. And I would say that finally, it is a driver, it's a key driver for European Union bilateral and multilateral relations. So to discuss all this, we have 4 perspectives that couldn't be more complementary. A vision from the European Parliament, the symmetrical perspective from Latin America, one of the key necessary allies in the world for the European Union to be successful in this endeavor. Then we will listen to a relevant opinion leader from the very active civil society community. Finally, we will listen, and in fact, not finally, we will start by listening to the diplomat, the External Action Service, and this would be our first introduction. So briefly, allow me some brief housekeeping notes. First, for you, the audience, this is your session. I encourage you to send your questions through the application. I will ensure that there is enough time for us to address them. Second, I will, and this is the worst part of being a moderator, it's not just that you cannot say what you opine, but is that I will ask all the interventions to keep below 5 minutes. I will be forced to be very tough on times, and without further ado, I invite Andras Rosmer. Andras Rosmer is team leader on the external dimension of the European Green Deal in the European External Action Services. This is our diplomacy. This is the European Union diplomacy. And my question to you, Andras, is what has changed with the Green Deal? What is the new approach? How do we define our priorities in this new context? Andras, the floor is yours. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, colleagues in Spain and around the world, and excellencies. It's great to be with you. In this introductory 5 minutes, I will obviously be only able to cover some headline issues, which then we can, of course, go into detail. One important point for us, of course, to make is I work for the External Action Service. My work starts where the work of our colleagues who work on in the internal dimension finishes. So for us, life is the easiest when there is an agreement among member states of what we should do. And in that sense, in fact, life was moderately easy after the arrival of the new Commission and the goal set of the 55% reduction in the very first European Council to follow the arrival of the new Commission almost. That, of course, is now the details of the Fit for 55 package have arrived. There will be internal discussions. Not all member states will see the same line, but we have our common goal set, and that allows for our diplomacy to set a good common narrative. And I think what has changed and what has, to respond to your question, I think the approach has changed quite a lot in the last 2-3 years. And to illustrate this, in terms of what used to be just climate diplomacy, or in fact, for what used to be energy and climate diplomacy, this is now diplomacy. All of our delegations around the world, our colleagues in far-flung places, by now can no longer say, "Oh, this is something the experts deal with this." It's not conferences in exotic places that happen and have no relevance for their daily work. It is their daily work, energy and climate diplomacy. And I mean this, we feel very much the demand for continuous updates, trainings, backgrounds has gone up a lot. And I think that's just simply the reflection of the importance of the topic and how it is treated. Climate diplomacy, we have moved from an approach that focuses on far-flung ambition to very detailed policy engagement with a number of countries. Of course, first and foremost with the major emitters. We have defined for ourselves, together with member states, the exact things we sometimes want from countries, sometimes in a very transactional approach on what they can deliver. We have come with new initiatives that we have not done in the past, and I'm very thankful for the previous speaker to talk about the Global Methane Pledge, which of course in that sense is a big new initiative on our side that perhaps today is political, but will be turned into very practical issues across the globe. On energy diplomacy, perhaps even more, the change is even more visible. I can tell that from my personal experience, having worked in this field now for some time, from a very narrow focus of energy security and fossil fuel security, which remains important, and I'll say a word about this, we have moved into a new world of energy diplomacy. I think a lot of it is captured in a document that the foreign ministers adopted at the beginning of this year in council conclusions at the Foreign Affairs Council. And I rarely suggest reading EU documents, but that's perhaps something the audience would want to look into. In this document, for example, we capture that the chief priority of our energy diplomacy as of this year is promoting the energy transition in all its aspects. Of course, renewables, energy efficiency, hydrogen, that goes to supporting research and development. Gray areas remain, and I will not hide them, and they may come up in the discussion. Our relationship with some fossil fuels, particularly gas, is still not fully defined by our member states. So is the relationship we have with nuclear. From a European perspective, of course, every member state has its own view. But the energy transition is now our number one priority. Second, energy security, of course, remains very important. And today, this is extra important with the gas crisis that we face. But we also think about the energy security of the future, the raw materials needed for the transition, etc. Lastly, we are very aware, especially in the External Action Service, of the impact of not only climate change, the geopolitical impact, but also of what we do, the chief answer to it being the energy transition. We promote just transition work across the globe. For example, we have a new project on coal transition, experience taking it abroad. And altogether, perhaps, just to conclude in a final sentence, we have now moved to a place where energy diplomacy is so entwined with all our economic and other diplomatic endeavors that, in fact, my newly founded Green Transition Division of the External Action Service is, in fact, almost part of the central decision.
Thank you. I think that from what I got, and it has been a very interesting just making clear what's there, it's the mainstreaming in all the policies of the European Union, as you have said. Nobody can hide behind saying, well, you know, this is for the experts. No, this is for everybody, and that's my first takeaway. I think that the other takeaways in the gray areas. In the European Union, sometimes we forget that the best pupil, the best country in reducing CO2 emissions has been the United States by going from coal to gas. But that's a different discussion. So without further ado, Claudio Sibach. Claudio Sibach comes from the other side of the Atlantic, from this very important, for the European Union, just area of Iberoamerica, Latin America. Claudio is currently the executive chairman of Generadores de Chile, the trade association of electricity producers there. He has been a leading actor in the fight against climate change, responsible for the agreement for the phase out of coal and in the industry and carbon neutrality. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Anna. I'm not only across the Atlantic, I'm also on the Southern Hemisphere. So it's 7 a.m. here, and it's a beautiful spring morning. So, well, thank you very much for the invitation to the World Energy Council Spanish Committee, and I will try to contribute with a foreign perspective on this international and foreign policy dimension of the European Green Deal. As you mentioned, our association is a collection of several companies, many of them European, of very diverse portfolios, and we inherit a great European tradition, not only naturally from Spain, but also many other European countries, and we keep close ties to the old continent, so I'm really happy to be here. And also the EU is a very relevant trade partner. It's the third trade partner, and Chilean exports to the EU amount to more than $8 billion per year, mainly to Netherlands, Spain, France, Germany, but with products like copper, where we're world famous, agricultural products, and wine and cellulose. But the thing is, Chile's economy is highly dependent on fossil fuels, and that's like everyone else. In our case, 75% of our energy, not electricity, energy comes from fossils, mainly, of course, from oil. And in the power sector, to keep up with the economic growth of the last decades, we moved away from mainly being renewables-based power until reaching about 40% of electricity from burning of coal. So in the last decades, this is among the highest in the OECD. So what have been the principles behind this, and what could be to help in the questions the European Green Deal raises is the good news that we're moving away from coal very fast and investing heavily in renewables. Actually, as you mentioned, in 2018, we had an agreement between the Chilean government and the companies that run coal-fired plants, committing to full phase-out of coal by 2040. By 2025 already, we expect that 3.6 gigawatts out of the original more than 5 gigawatts will be either decommissioned or ready to be disconnected as soon as we can to do so safely. So this of course, means that in a way, and probably you've read it in the news, and it's probably the reason why I've hoped to be invited and was here invited, is that this has been really a very successful story, and we've been heavily investing in new renewables like wind and solar. 100% of everything new development and under construction is renewable. And we've committed to carbon neutrality with broad political support. And it's been a highly attractive market for renewables, according to Bloomberg or the other indexes. So, and we already reached peak emissions in the power sector around 2016, 2017. But just as Joseph McMonagle well described, we're also very worried about the current crisis and how this could affect climate action and its public support, which, as I say, in Chile still is high up. because during the transition, we have to bridge the gap, and we will be still heavily dependent on global fossil fuels. And through the pandemic, at least the power sector has shown great resilience, as we have been able to keep up at being a fundamental pillar for the sustainable recovery. We've accelerated investment in renewables, and of course, this helps out with creation of jobs. And what are the underlying principles for this? One is the openness of our economy to foreign investment. Many of it is European. Free trade agreements, like the one we have with the European Union. Low input tariffs, which allow us to bring in technology. Intense competition in our generation market. Sound public policy, also that was mentioned previously. And the long-term commitment to sustainable economic growth. In Chile, there are no public subsidies for renewables, apart, of course, from the endowment we have in massive sunshine in the Atacama, winds from the Pacific, water running from the Andes, or the heat in the volcanoes. And the renewable energy is helping many export industries to be able to become cleaner. The mining sector has been very active in its role in climate action and is switching from renewables in their operations. Solar, salts, copper, and lithium are key resources for a net zero economy for renewables, and energy storage, electric mobility are a great opportunity for our mining industry. You know that we produce 1/3 of world copper, and we have the highest lithium reserves in the world. So we also want to become a global leader in green hydrogen, just like we do with copper. So, and we also in the public sector, we've put a priority in electrification of public transport. We have 800 buses. That's the largest fleet out of China. And we just awarded last week 1,000 new electric buses. So in conclusion, in the power sector, we hope to keep moving fast from the current 45% to reach 85% renewables 2030. This will contribute like 60. This emergency gives us little time. So we believe that the path of a private sector market-based approach for the energy transition to carbon neutrality through electrification and renewable electricity in the context of sound public policy will help us. And we hope this experience can be an example for many countries, particularly developing economies, but also European economies in the context of the EU Green Deal, which face similar challenges. And we can hopefully this follows suit in our collective fight against climate change. So thank you very much, and open for questions.
Thank you for almost keeping to the time. And I would say that it was a needed voice. And I will highlight three. I mean, there are many topics to highlight, but three things. First is that in this EU diplomacy, companies have a lot to do. And this is, I mean, in Spain, it's especially true as there are many Spanish companies that are investing in Latin America in the area of energy. So this is the other branch of the diplomacy. On free trade agreements, you have highlighted it. It's great that the External Action Service is with us. We need to push Mercosur. We need to push to finalize, to get on going the Colombia trade agreement. There are many times, I mean, these are strategic for us, and in your mainstreaming of this, the importance of this policy, this is also for the bilateral or with the Mercosur agreement. You have highlighted public support. This is key, and I think this is something that has already been highlighted by McMonigan, but it's key. Unfortunately, as I say, I'm here to moderate. So, Maria Pastukova, I hope that I haven't completely mispronounced. Maria Pastukova is Senior Policy Advisor of E3G. It's a European think tank, and she specializes in energy diplomacy and sustainable energy finance. This is an aspect that is absolutely relevant, where the European Union is working a lot. Maria, you have the floor. My question, I mean, it's almost there.
Yes.
I would say, let's formulate it like this. How can the EU become a strong global standard and norm setter? This is what I said. The European Union has this ambition to be the referee in this area, cum actor, And how can we keep it within this global energy landscape? Maria.
Many thanks. Greetings from Berlin to all distinguished speakers and participants. And many thanks indeed for your question. It is a highly relevant one, I think, as the EU is indeed a regulatory powerhouse and is being looked upon as such by many other countries and regions. So acting on own standards and norm settings is not only arguable the most powerful tool the EU has for extrapolating its Green Deal abroad, but also means to ensure an orderly and sustainable transition in the neighborhood, including the eastern and southern neighborhood, which is by no means uncontested, where we see China is pushing own energy and finance standards within the now green BRI. We see the US that's been leading on standard setting in many areas, including efficiency in industry for years. And now is actually time for the EU to step in, starting with 4 things. One of them has been mentioned many times already. It's the Global Methane Pledge initiative, and the EU has very high leadership potential there, given its own ambitious methane agenda. So I won't go into in detail, but the next and arguably the most important area for the EU to act upon is sustainable finance. Indeed, the EU's budget is the strongest tool it has to act upon on Green Deal commitments, and acting on sustainable finance can help strengthen relationship with partner countries in the global south and spur clean economy transition in countries which are otherwise not able to follow the EU's pace of decarbonization. Most importantly, the fossil fuel producing countries and partners of the EU, but also the least developed countries in the global south. Acting on sustainable finance can also help unlock private finance, much needed to scale up clean energy transition in emerging markets and developing economies. And it offers opportunities for the European business and finance sector, of course. And last but not least, it can help substantiate the multilateral offers on the table in which the EU strives to play a leading role, one of them being the Build Back Better World initiative, B3W, and also provide a backbone to the own nascent initiative, the Global Gateway. The EU taxonomy is a strong framework, and it is certainly worth considering whether and how it can be applied to private and public finance abroad. As financial markets are global, the EU taxonomy will have implications for the business globally as well, so voluntary alignment with the EU taxonomy abroad would potentially unlock green finance for non-EU actors as well in third countries, maybe even delivering an additional push to the public financial institutions on the ground. So what does the EU need to be able to use this potentially very powerful tool? There are several things. I will mention a couple of them for the shortage of time. First, the EU needs to lead the push for the establishment of the so-called global standard within the international platform on sustainable finance, which it is already doing, and find a common ground with other major economies and emerging taxonomies in other regions. Second, another major task would be to take the US on board, which is currently not part of this international dialogue. And the current US administration should be actually open to discussing joining the initiative, given their ambition to become a global leader themselves. But at the very least, the EU and the US should consolidate their efforts to push for more ambition on sustainable finance ahead of the G20 summit this year, but also for taking place next year, including climate, clean energy ministerial, Ministry of Innovation, G7 and G20. And also internal coordination is, of course, needed between existing and emerging initiatives such as NDICI and the Global Gateway, as well as the clarity of where the energy transition finance pot actually comes from and whether it is aligned with the EU sustainable finance regulations. Finally, the EU should intensify cooperation efforts to establish enabling regulatory frameworks for clean energy finance in the partner countries of the Global South, where currently there are none, to unlock private finance and prepare a support offer for also smaller enterprises otherwise struggling with voluntary reporting on taxonomy or similar frameworks. Finally, I would like to very quickly mention two further important areas where the EU has real leadership potential within the Green Deal. First, one is energy and product efficiency, as the EU has one of the world's regions' best minimum product efficiency standards and labeling regimes, and European manufacturers are leaders in all major product classes that can deliver real progress on global energy efficiency goals. But compared to other major economies such as the US and China, the EU has done relatively little internationally, and stepping up on efficiency diplomacy would also deliver a co-benefit to the overall goals of the Green Deal, as it would make a reduction of fossil fuel use easier to achieve. Finally, the EU has the unprecedented model of a subcontinental and integrated power market, and as electrification and integration of power markets will be a backbone of an increasingly decarbonized global economy, the EU must act upon it within the Green Deal. And a lot of other regions are looking towards the EU's experience as they look for own solutions, and the EU is well advised to strengthen its image as a kind of a power market blueprint within the Green Deal. I will stop here and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping with the time to the second. And frankly, I think that this idea that the European Union has to be the blueprint for this Build Back Better that you have highlighted is the big message for this Green Deal diplomacy. I fully concur that the South that you have called, this is where things will happen or not happen. And there at the COP, I think that we need to reach a realistic. I'm looking at Secretary McMonaghan because you highlighted two conclusions. I think that from Maria, we have to take this third conclusion unless we reach a reasonable approach, not for the HIPEX, for the poorest countries in the world, but for these middle-of-the-road developing countries that will, as I can quote Minister Rakesh of India telling me, we will burn whatever we have. For us, this is our priority. We understand the challenges of the greenhouse emissions. We will do what we can, but our first priority is development. Maria, thank you. Last but not least, we are speaking about this projection of the European Union as a reference, as a regulatory power in this area. And we have Javi López. Javi López is an MEP from the PSC-PSOE, a Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, S&D, in the European Parliament since 2014. He's co-chair of the Euro-Latin American Parliamentary Assembly. Again, the importance of this dialogue, of this cooperation. He's a member of the Committee of Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, and his political activity at the European Parliament also includes being a member of the presidency of the Party of the Socialists, of the European Socialists, and president of the European Socialist Environment, Climate Change and Energy Network. So my question to you, Javi López, and with you are closing. So having your vision from the European Parliament and 5 minutes in the European Parliament, I have the experience, is an eternity. Many reports do not get for the presentation more than 5 minutes, even less than that. My question would be, the European Green Deal is slowly taking shape through a series of laws, policy packages, and action plans. It has become a kind of policy fundamentals of the Build Back Better. And this was also mentioned that it's mainstreamed in the different policies of the Union. At the same time, it has profound geopolitical dimension. So what does the European Green Deal imply from your perspective, from the legislator in Europe? What does this imply for our relations with other countries?
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to share with my colleagues this table, and especially with our moderator, with Ana Palacio, our former minister on foreign affairs. Well, it implies, it has a long list of implications for our foreign policy. No? I will try to be brief and especially schematic. First of all, in my view, will alter the European trade and investment partners. in terms of energy, basically. No, EU imported more than 320 billion worth of energy products in 2019, and more than 60% of EU imports from Russia were energy products, basically. And a massive reduction in this flow will restructure EU relationship with key energy suppliers, Russia, Algeria, and Norway. No? And Europe's exit from fossil fuel dependency will adversely affect a number of regional partners and may even destabilize them economically and politically. And this is something that we should try to look closer. Also, my second item, it will be is we have the opportunity through the European Green Deal to be more autonomous in terms of geopolitical dependencies. The decarbonization of our economy could imply less dependencies from these export fossil fuel big actors in the world. No? Third, Europe accounts currently around the 20% of global crude oil imports. And theoretically, the impact on the global oil market will be depressing prices and reducing the income of the main exporters. This, like in the long term, this will be the economic consequences and obviously with geopolitical implications. Fourth, a greener Europe will be more dependent on imports of products and raw materials, no, that serve as input for clean energy and clean technology. This is something that we should try to also design in terms of future. For example, rare earth elements of which China is the largest producer are essential for battery production. And this is something that China is designing quite well, trying to ensure and guarantee their lines of production and especially the import of other countries, especially like in Latin America, as Ana Palacio mentioned, and Africa. Europe could remain an importer of energy, but that energy should be need to be green, such as green hydrogen produced in sun-rich parts of the world, such as the Middle East and north of Africa. But also it should be an opportunity for the south of Europe, to create in a big scale production of green energy using our sun resources, and also like without the dependency of imports. Fifth, the Green Deal will have an impact of Europe's international competitiveness, and we should try to adapt to this. If European firms take on regulation-related costs that their foreign competitors do not bear, they will become less competitive, both domestically and abroad. And this is something to follow close. And we will have to design a carbon border tax, and this also will have impact in the energy. We should try to design a legal instrument that is like oriented to our green goals, protecting our industry, but being fair with the trade with the rest of the world. And the last elements, the EU fifth element, the EU will need to develop new trade and investment agreements. This is also something that also our moderator mentioned, a new models of financial and technical assistance, trying to focus on energy and the green transition, and a new approach to international diplomacy, especially the relations with the United States and China are key in this goal. Also, a new orientation with the relations with the Gulf and Russia will be needed if we really have this decarbonized goal in 30 years. These are my key message, but at least like the decarbonization will change everything, but also foreign policy and geopolitical balance of powers.
Thank you, and I think that this is a conclusion that meets what the External Action Service, what Andras told us. It's that in the end, the mainstreaming of this, of this goal of the European Union, of this vision of the world by the European Union is going to permeate all our policies, and in particular foreign policy. You have mentioned relations with our southern neighbors of the Mediterranean, with our eastern neighbors. That's one of the key takeaways. I didn't mention, and I think it's fundamental, that you have mentioned it, and CBAC also mentioned it, is this idea that Green Deal is not just the production of energy, it's also rare earths, it's also lithium. This is fundamental, and this, I think, again, we need to do some kind of pedagogy with the public opinion. The public opinion has to understand and buy all this area. The third very important takeaway is that you say, and you're right, we will not depend on depend that much on imports of oil and gas, but we will be importing green power, green electricity. And also I would say hydrogen, green hydrogen. I read not a long time ago an article that was projecting Morocco and Chile as producers of green hydrogen for export. We have seen a big, important project of using the energy in the Congo River to also produce hydrogen and import. And this, by the way, it's also the Gulf that is interested in this development. So we see the Gulf, until now we have seen the Gulf as oil and gas producers. I think, and McMonaghan just mentioned that, but I think that we need to, again, understand and make the public opinion is that this is much more complex, that on the front line, there is an effort, an interest, vision, a projection of oil and gas producing countries to also be present and have an important say in this decarbonization and methane control. Any question or any comment? I give you a couple of minutes to any of you if you want. If not, I open the floor for questions. If there are, I know that we have a secretary of the session that is organizing the question that we are receiving. I have one, and I will start by CBAC, because in my opinion, Claudio, our relationship is very important, but I would like you to elaborate a bit on what is the regional, if there is a regional in Latin America, if there is a regional, and the dimension that this has with the Pacific policies that you are that you are launching in the Pacific dimension of your countries. So, Claudio.
Thank you, Anna. Well, Latin America is a very big region, and you're all aware of that. But despite that, in energy terms, we're, at least in the case of Chile, pretty not integrated with the rest. Well, it's in a way we are connected with Argentina. Argentina has large reserves of natural gas, but for mostly geopolitical reasons and internal political reasons. They've underinvestment in the last decades in gas, and so we're not depending on natural gas coming from Argentina, but rather from the global markets, which comes back to the fact that we're very worried on the global disruption of markets. But we are very open to the Pacific. As you mentioned, we have this whole coast, and we are very connected economically. Of course, China, big, great partner, the US, the Pacific Alliance with Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and of course, partners across the Pacific like Australia and New Zealand. So the Pacific as a whole builds up an economic group that is very relevant. And of course, it's relevant both for trade, but also for the whole investments that we've received from countries, both from China, from the US, Australia. And despite being on the other side, on the Atlantic, Chile can be and has been an entry port for Europe and other countries for the region. And we see that with European companies having their bases in Chile for investing in Latin America. I think our track record and policy, being an OECD country for more than a decade, and also being very open to migration and also to foreign investment, helps us to be a base, despite not being as integrated as we could be in Latin America. But just to end, I think for renewables, and if we want to keep with the pace, what we need is to integrate more and more Latin America, just as you and Europe will have to do, to balance out the different regions in terms of renewables. So that's what I think is where we should head to.
Which, Claudio, is important. I mean, we ourselves in the European Union, we have to work a lot with our grid in order to take full advantage of the renewables, of the intermittent renewables. Maria, I have a question for you that came from the audience. And the question is, what do you do about the taxonomy? Where is this going? The taxonomy did not address nuclear. Well, it did not address gas either. Gas has gone from being clearly a transition, long-term transition solution to evaporating and thin gas. What is your perspective on this important part for establishing green financing, this idea of the taxonomy? How will it go?
Thanks for this question. Yeah, it's a relevant one, and I didn't want to go into the detail as this is also a sensitive one, I'm sure you know. And maybe our speakers from the European Union can add something on this, but I think we must differentiate between what the taxonomy can do within the European Union and what the taxonomic potential can do, aligning the private and maybe even public finance abroad, and internationally, being very, very detailed on nuclear and gas might be in a short term a stumbling block in achieving an agreement with countries such as China, such as India, and many other countries that are on this international platform for sustainable finance, working towards a global normal or global standard for sustainable finance. And it certainly makes sense to focus on other issues right now to get this kind of a base of starting from which the countries can help develop and strengthen the global sustainable finance regime. Taxonomy internally is a very sensitive issue, and I think it is also not the final version that we're seeing now, so some developments may take place.
My question was willingly provocative, and your response was extremely good. Andras Rosner, where are we in our bilateral relations with the United States? We started with this administration, with this Biden administration, with a lot of projects. Where are we? Because this also seems to have just languished a bit.
Thank you. That's also a very good question indeed. In the previous administration, the key forum for EU-US energy relations, which was the EU-US Energy Council, was indeed left a little bit on the back burner, both on its high-level format, which happened only once throughout the Trump presidency, and its lower-level format, where most of the work takes place, of course, in working levels. there has been a major uptick in relations over the last 8-9 months. To the degree, in fact, I think now we are at the moment where everybody says that this we need to make sure that we don't create too many new structures and create too much new streams that overlap. But the EU-US Energy Council has been highly invigorated. Of course, there's an energy and climate stream also in the new Tech and Trade Council, under which there is specifically a work strand on technology. We are talking with the US on energy security issues. We are thinking about establishing potentially even a separate work stream on energy diplomacy, which I would perhaps in here define as in common narratives across the globe in toward bilateral or in multilateral fora. It's really a blooming relationship for the moment. Of course, there has been a lot of pent-up demand. There will be issues where we not necessarily see eye to eye. Our US colleagues don't have same views on CBAM as we do, but it's clearly there is an opportunity there with this administration that I think has been grasped and will.
We keep this. There is an opportunity with this administration. Let's push for it. My last question, Javi, and this is another important, in my opinion, and you are extremely well placed to answer it. There is going to be a new German government. It probably be what everybody understands, that it will be led by the socialists with the presence of the Green Party, important presence, and the liberals. In your opinion, what is going to be the repercussion on the transit of all these policies through the European Parliament?
Thank you very much. First of all, it seems that we will have a new German government really committed with the new European Green Deal and the Green Agenda. This is the first point. I would add that the last one, and especially the passed on during the last 2 years, also by the European Commission, led by a German conservative president, it was clear also in the same direction. But we are sure that the new German government will be really committed with this green agenda and the decarbonization. Now we made the easy part, decide the targets, basically, the targets for 2030 and the target of neutral climate economy in 2050. Now it comes the difficult part. It's to do it, and to do it fast, and also to do it avoiding an eco backlash, And what it means this, and this is something that I think the new Chancellor of Germany will have in mind. It's we need to decarbonize our economy, and for this, it's basically you will need to change our industry, our forms of energy, our mobility, and our housing. These 4 elements. It's change the structure of our economy and also of our society. To do it, we should be fair in this transition, and trying to use mechanism of compensation, first of all, ensuring the 3 elements that probably will have cost in this transition. It's like for jobs, for the industry, obviously, and for the consumers. These 3 elements we will be present for ensure like a social transition, and this is basically, I think, the message lead for the new Chancellor, potentially the new Chancellor of Germany.
And with this, we close our session. Allow me just to say, picking up on where Secretary McMonaghan's left it, that we aim at COP26 that will start in a few days, and what we understand and what has come clear from your intervention is A, the methane, raising awareness and targeting methane, financing also this idea of technological and finance contribution of to these struggling economies that cannot just have the choice either development or compliance with the gas. The third very important topic that emerged once and again is this idea that public opinion has to buy it. In the end, this is about public opinion, and again, it has to be explained that it cannot be either jobs or climate. No, we need to be better at that. And in this, de-ideologize. Sometimes we stick to renewables. And if the goal is green gas emissions, let's go for everything that diminishes green gas emissions. Last but not least, the European Union has an important role to play. Sometimes in conferences, young people ask me, but our world was the world of yesterday. What is, and I say, no. The European Union, we Europeans, I mean, you young people, you have an asset, which is your life expectancy. You can do many, many things, and we can contribute in a different world, in different contexts, but we can and we will contribute. And this just embracing it in the diplomacy of the Green Deal is a fantastic, and congratulations for whoever was the one that imagined this as the topic for our discussions. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Ana. Verdaderamente un modelo como moderadora, tanto por cómo has llevado el debate como por las conclusiones finales. Iniciamos ahora la tercera y última sesión, que también será en inglés. I'm going to switch to English to present our very distinguished guest, Lord Deben, current chairman of the United Kingdom Climate Change Committee. Lord Deben was the UK's longest-serving Secretary of State for Environment, 1993 to 1997. As Environment Secretary, he introduced the Environment Act 1995. He has held several other high-level ministry posts, including Secretary of State for Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, 89 to 93. Lord Deben founded and chairs Sancroft, a corporate responsibility consultancy working with blue-chip companies around the world to help them improve their environmental and social and ethical impact. He chairman of Alpac Limited and chairman of the Personal Investment Management and Finance Advice Association. So thank you very much, Lord Deben. It's a real honor having you in this event, and in this particular moment, with the UN Climate Change Conference in the Partis in Glasgow, taking place a couple of weeks and hosted by the UK this year. I have a few questions for you, please, Ms. Deben, and thank you very much for attending. The first one is that a key objective for COP26 is keeping the 1.5 centigrade temperature limit alive. How can we ensure in COP26 and beyond that that goal is achievable?
Well, I think first of all, and I'm very pleased to be with you, I spent a lot of time when I was minister with Spanish ministers and found the cooperation extremely well. And as I always say in these circumstances, I just want people to know that there are many of us in the United Kingdom who are absolutely furious about Britain leaving the European Union, where we should be, and I'm sorry that we're not. And we shall do everything in our power to go to the furthest lengths to cooperate with the rest of Europe. But let me say, I mean, the truth is that, of course, we won't achieve everything at COP26. This is a ratcheting system. The meeting in Paris created a system where all the time we ratchet up as it becomes clearer and clearer, even to the stupidest governments, and there are some, that actually climate change is going to have this fundamental existential effect. And I think we have to recognize that we've already achieved some remarkable things in advance of COP26. I mean, who would have thought that we would have had China and other Southeast Asian countries committing themselves not to support further extension of coal-based generation outside their countries. We now look to see even further steps on that, but it is a very, very important statement. Very important that China has committed itself to net zero, admittedly only in 2060, so we hope to be able to improve on that, but also that more than half the industrialized countries are now committed to net zero in 2050. There really is a huge amount that has been done, but we just have to do more all the time, and the meeting in Glasgow is going to be very important, first to increase the commitments, secondly, to make sure that we convince the developing countries that we rich countries who have benefited from pollution are going to help them reach better standards of living without the pollution in between. And thirdly, we've really got to bring into the fold a number of those countries that have so far not taken their part. And one is very encouraged. At the same time, there's a very, very large amount to do, and we've got to keep this balance. We've got to be optimistic. I'm optimistic. I think back 10 years, I'd never have thought 10 years ago we'd have got as far as we've got. So I'm optimistic, but it's a very, very tough operation to keep the temperature rises below 2 and down to 1.5.
Thank you very much. In your view, what can we expect from the big emitters, China, the US, India, the UAE, at COP26?
Well, the first thing is we have got to recognize that we exported a lot of our manufacturing to China. So you've got to be a bit careful about attacking China for being the biggest emitter, because they're emitting on our behalf, if you like. That's what we did. So there is a relationship that we've got to build on that. The Chinese do understand, recognize, and accept climate change. They are passing through a very difficult period. So far, their steps have been significant, and we shouldn't underestimate them. What they're doing in electric motor cars, what they're doing in offshore and onshore wind, what they're doing on solar, is remarkable. We just have to make sure that they do more. And we also need to make sure that some other countries that are not helping in that direction, and I mentioned particularly Australia, begin to understand what their responsibilities are as well. And then as far as India is concerned, there's a great deal that we can do. And there's no doubt that Mr. Modi has begun to understand very clearly that renewables is the necessary future for India. And it is a nation, after all, which is under huge pressure. And they also have got to feel that we in the West are going to support them and help them make the changes they need. Happily, what they need to do for climate change is precisely what they need to do in order to get the development which they themselves have to have. So I am, as again, optimistic, but this is a matter of pushing it every moment and reminding people that this is existential. If we don't win this battle, then there won't be a world. I mean, it's not just a question of making a better world, but if we do win this battle, we will have built we've not just won the battle against climate change, we will have built a better, cleaner, kinder world. And to do that, we have to remind ourselves that climate change, as the Pope said in the great encyclical Laudato Si, he made this important point, which is that climate change is the symptom of what we've done to the world, of what we've done to biodiversity, of what we've done to fertility of the soil, of what we've done to water pollution and pollution of the air. And those are the things that we have to clear up if we are in fact going to deal with climate change. And if we clear those things up, this will be a better world. So we are building something better as well as fighting this existential risk.
Thank you very much, Lord Evan. It's very nice to have some optimistic speech in this actual condition. So thank you for your comments. Now, changing a little bit to another subject, can you tell us about the role of the Climate Change Committee you chair as policymaker in the UK? Are there any lessons learned you would like to share with a country like Spain that includes an independent climate committee in its recent climate change and energy transition law, but yes, has to develop its governance mechanism via secondary legislation?
Well, we have been very fortunate because the Climate Change Committee in Britain is entirely independent. There are 8 or 9 members of it. We are all, except for myself, the chairman, everyone else is a very, very well-known international economist or climate scientist. And we have a significant secretariat of some 40 to 50 people who are themselves scientists. And we set the budgets by sector, 5-year budgets for the government. And those budgets are then put before Parliament. We've just finished the 6th budget, which takes us to 2038. Every one of those budgets have, as they've come out, been accepted by Parliament. And once Parliament has accepted it, and this is the crucial thing, they can't be changed without the Climate Change Committee's agreement. Now, the important thing about that is that everybody knows where they are. Business knows where they are. The government knows where it is. It has to meet those targets by law, and indeed would be taken to court. Not by me, I'm happy to say, but by any of the campaigning organisations if they weren't meeting what they have committed themselves to statutorily. So we are independent. I can't be sacked once I'm appointed. I've got another 18 months to go, but at the moment we're appointed independently. I'm appointed by the First Minister of Scotland, First Minister of Wales, the First Minister of the North of Ireland, and the Climate Change Minister in the UK government. So that's 4 different political parties. And that means that you are very independent. So I may have been a minister, but I am actually accepted by the whole range of political parties. We are also a country which has a common view. All political parties are committed to our climate change policy. So independence is very important. Secondly, financing the committee well enough for them to do independent research. And every year we have by law to produce a report on how well the government has done what it's supposed to do. And these reports we do department by department. So we say what the Foreign Office has done, we say what the business department has done, what the Ministry of Education has done, and how far they have kept up to what we need to do. And we're very pleased to hear that you're going to appoint an independent committee. We would like to welcome it to the group now all over the world of independent climate change committees, which we have put together and which we share amongst ourselves. This is not something run by the British, it's run by the various other countries. So, for example, we have very big support from Chile and Mexico. We have the Finns and the Swedes and a whole range of people from the rest of Europe, the French, and indeed one of my committee members is also the chairman of the French Independent Climate Change Committee, because she is a French Canadian and therefore has nationality which makes that possible. So we are very pleased to welcome the Spanish. We think that you will have much to help us with and advise us on. We are very impressed with some of the things that happened in Spain, particularly welcome Repsol's decision that it really is going to be the leader among the oil and gas countries. Santander is a major investor in the battle against climate change. So there's a lot going for Spain, and we very much look forward to welcoming it.
Well, thank you very much, Lord Even. We hope we can follow such a quality model, and we hope everything develops as it should in Spain. So thank you, Lord Even, for your contribution. We are very honored of having you here as the final part of our session. So thank you, Lord Even.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Y ahora ya llegamos a la recta final del evento y nos gustaría terminar con un breve vídeo preparado por las empresas miembros del CECME, a las que desde aquí me gustaría enviar mi agradecimiento por su involucración en todas las actividades del Comité y del World Energy Council. Por favor, el vídeo.
Afrontamos el importante reto de comunicar de una manera clara y sencilla que disponemos ya de las herramientas efectivas y adecuadas para combatir el cambio climático. La electrificación de nuestra sociedad no es solo una vía imprescindible para conseguir este reto, sino una oportunidad para todos. Una oportunidad para que podamos disponer de una energía asequible, fiable y sostenible que nos permita el desarrollo social y el bienestar.
Nos encontramos en un momento trascendental a nivel mundial en la lucha contra el cambio climático, en el que la Unión Europea desempeña un rol central. Para esta labor es fundamental, como ya se está viendo, el trabajo común y el esfuerzo común de administraciones, empresas, ciudadanos, sociedad en su conjunto, y en este sentido es un placer, un orgullo para Cepsa poder acoger hoy la reunión anual del CECME.
La emergencia climática requiere una respuesta colectiva urgente. Es necesario humanizar la energía. Los clientes y los usuarios deben tomar mayor protagonismo en la transición energética. Para ello, tenemos que conocer sus expectativas para poder activar la ciudadanía y conseguir de esa forma un crecimiento sostenible. Es el momento de actuar, ahora o nunca. Como dice nuestro lema, Changing Tomorrow Now.
Como operadores de redes, en Agas creemos que el uso de las infraestructuras existentes puede hacer que el proceso de descarbonización se lleve a cabo de una manera eficiente, también desde el punto de vista económico, y justa en toda la Unión Europea. En este proceso, el gas natural hoy y los gases renovables en el futuro van a ser esenciales para lograr el objetivo de neutralidad climática.
Las soluciones para revertir el cambio climático, la mayor amenaza que afronta la humanidad, solo pueden ser globales con la acción combinada de todos y cada uno de los países. La Unión Europea está liderando esta lucha con el Green Deal y más recientemente con el paquete Fit for 55, y será crucial la diplomacia energética a desarrollar para conseguir que se acelere la transición energética hacia modelos de producción y consumo circulares y eficiente, salvando las diferencias entre países con objetivos energéticos divergentes y con efectos importantes en la geopolítica energética.
La transición energética global requiere de ingentes inversiones que generen energía limpia competitiva y oportunidades económicas y empleo. Para lograrlo, la Unión Europea debe mostrar liderazgo, creando un plan que garantice la consecución de la descarbonización y creando un marco que atraiga las inversiones necesarias y reduzca el coste de capital. La credibilidad regulatoria es fundamental para garantizar la confianza de los inversores y para asegurar el éxito en el largo plazo.
El Acuerdo de París, los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible y la Agenda 2030, el European Green Deal, la transición energética y las alianzas entre empresas e instituciones para conseguir un desarrollo económico descarbonizado son los pilares fundamentales de la estrategia del Grupo Naturgy.
Pues la diplomacia del Green Deal tiene que ser una diplomacia que permita que no perdamos más industria en Europa, al contrario, que logremos reindustrializarnos y por tanto todas las medidas que tengan que ver con evitar la deslocalización de nuestra industria hacia jurisdicciones más laxas en términos medioambientales será muy necesaria. Y también no nos olvidemos de las políticas de vecindad, y más en un país como España, que es vecino del norte de África, que es un gran suministrador de energía tradicional hacia Europa. Creo que la transición energética y el Green Deal tiene que acompasar la ambición europea con una hábil gestión de esa transición energética en los países de Europa, permitiendo que su desarrollo económico no solo se mantenga, sino que se acelere.
Nadie tiene dudas de que el futuro de la energía está ligado al irreversible proceso de transición ecológica. El sector energético debe facilitar la descarbonización y el impulso de la digitalización de nuestro modelo económico. Desde Sedigas y el sector gasista impulsamos el desarrollo de los gases renovables como el biogás, biometano o el hidrógeno. Estos serán vectores clave de futuro para dar respuesta a los retos climáticos y garantizar un sistema energético que nos proporcione una energía asequible, sostenible y segura para todos.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias a todos, a los ponentes, a ENERCLUB, al Real Instituto Elcano y a Cepsa por su patrocinio. Nos esperamos el año que viene. Muchas gracias.